And we're back. I'm Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems. With me is Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute.
Great to be back with our listeners again, Bill. Before starting a training program, I usually meet with each salesperson and ask them the question, what does a perfect week look like for you? Usually they stammer and reply with, it depends. I ask, depends on what? Well, what happens, they say. I ask, who's in charge of how you trade your time, you or them? In today's episode, Bill and I will be investigating what is a perfect week and much more on episode 413 of Get in the Door podcast. We got a nice email this week from an organization that ranks podcasts, and I think the organization is Slintel, and they evaluated over 60 podcasts, and we, the Get in the Door podcast, was ranked number 11.
That's
so
very
thank
nice.
you thank you for all the ratings and the rankings, and you can see by the entire list will be in the show notes, getinthedoorpodcast.com. So you can see all the other ones too. So it's always nice.
Great. That is really exciting news. And we're in good company. Nationally known sales trainers such as Jeffrey Gittimer was ranked 18th. Andy Paul was ranked 14th. And so we're excited about the traction we're getting, not just from our listeners, but from those people who do rankings and all that sort of stuff. Ranked number 11th. That's good.
Yeah, and always consider, developing your sales skills every single day, whether it's through our podcast, Get in the Door podcast once a week, or you'll see other podcasts that can touch on different topics that you may want to develop.
And we heard a couple of weeks ago from one of our listeners, Anita. We mentioned it in our last podcast. She wanted us to discuss how we handle 6 different objections. We covered 3 of them in the last podcast, number 412. They were all put-offs from the prospect and when we were asked to meet them. This week we have 2 more of them. These seem to happen a little earlier in the process. The 2 that we want to talk about, we're not interested, hear that a lot, and I just don't have time to talk. So these are both put-offs as well, but we handle them a little bit differently. So I'll start off with the we're not interested. As we talked about in our last podcast, we should think about the call so far and really ask ourselves, have we said anything that's interesting yet, right? Have we asked any challenging questions or made some kind of a provocative statement? And I work with salespeople and sometimes they say, hey, the reason I called is I want to talk to you about what I have to offer. And it's like, well, that's not that interesting. It's not provocative. But they're afraid to say something that's challenging. And so I think that fear comes across in their voice. Any objection, we want to think about what we do. I don't think we need to have a great response. I think we need to acknowledge it. I wouldn't expect you to be interested at this point. Or, hey, I'm sure you get plenty of calls from people trying to sell you something. So just, acknowledge that you're breaking into their day somehow. Restate the value. If I could show you a way to save money, save time, as we have at other companies. And then go ahead and ask for the appointment again. Could we find time to meet, either phone or Zoom? And I think the thing we always have to remember with objections, Scott, is nothing works all the time. Right, so at least have one secondary request and it'll just increase your chances of success.
Exactly. There are no guarantees. And the first commitment that salespeople have to make is to make the attempt. And you're attempting to have a conversation with somebody and you are interrupting them. So you may be taking time away from what is more important to them and what they're more interested in. And it could be a crisis. You never know the battles that people are fighting.
That's right.
And you need to be able to qualify it a little bit better. And hopefully you can create some interest in what you say, but you also have to think about what are you saying? And if you're not saying anything or not asking anything, then you're not creating any interest right out of the gate. So your goal is to create interest and curiosity when you call anybody. And if you're getting this put off frequently, you need to reevaluate some of your approach. And a good response that I would say is, that's my fault. So if they say to me that I'm not interested, you go, that's my fault. I didn't bring anything up that's interesting. Can I ask you 2 questions? And that's one of them. and that adds a little bit of humor because usually you'll ask, can I ask you a question? They'll go, you just did. Well, can I ask you 2 questions? And that was one of them. And now you add a little levity to the situation. But if you're talking in the first opportunity for the prospect to talk and they respond with no interest, you have to really ask yourselves, what did I say so far? And obviously it was nothing that was that important to them.
Yeah, and you got to practice these things, right? I think too often salespeople and I've done it before myself. We get on the script and we just kind of are reading the script, and when they get off script and we don't know what to do, and we haven't practiced the secondary ask or this question like can I ask you 2 questions? And that was one of them. We don't have any fun with them. We sound like robots.
Right.
And it's when we have a little bit of fun and we make a little fun of ourselves and we understand the situation. Hey, look, I know I caught you in the middle of your day. You have a moment to talk. And just make it sound more natural, and you might have an opportunity to get things moving because you're just trying to break into a conversation and get something happening.
Yeah.
So how do you handle the I don't have time to talk?
Well, I would respond with, if we scheduled a 15-minute call, would you be interested in learning more about how we work with companies like yours? And then afterwards, you're going to know more about the different options available in the marketplace, and you can decide what you want to do next. I really want to give them an option to be able to learn more and the option to decide if they want to take advantage of what's out there. I think a lot of people are really curious about what's going on in the marketplace. When we learn something new, sometimes our first reaction is, how come I didn't know that?
Right.
How come they knew that and I didn't know that? What am I missing?
And that's a compelling question, right?
Yeah, right. I mean,
ask something interesting.
Right. And get them curious.
Yeah.
And don't mislead them. I'm not implying that at all.
No.
And sometimes salespeople can do that. Don't mislead the prospect. But they're curious about what's going on in the marketplace. And you can say, if I could just share with you one thing that we're doing, how we work with other companies, I'll tell you about it. I'll answer some questions. And then at the end of our phone call, you can decide what you want to do.
Right.
It's completely up to them.
Right.
When they're in control, they're going to feel like they can contribute, they can inquire, and then they've got the decision-making power whether they continue the conversation or not.
Yeah, the thing I do with the I don't have time to talk is I assume they want to talk. So I think of it as a delay rather than a denial. So I just say, hey, look, I'm sorry if I caught you at a bad time. Do you want me to call you later today or tomorrow morning? What time is best for you? And I go to an alternative choice. Should we schedule a time so we don't interrupt a meeting? And I'm just making very assumptive now that you're not saying you don't want it. You're just saying you don't have time right now. And quite often, because I'm confident and more assumptive, I might even say, grab your calendar. Let's see if we can find a time to put on the calendar. And they grab their calendar and they're not even thinking about why they're making the appointment. And then I have 4 or 5 minutes when I call them the next time to get further in the conversation and ask some interesting questions. So I just think of it as a delay rather than a denial. Again, doesn't always work, but quite often we get that call appointment, which then hopefully leads to a Zoom or an in-person appointment.
Yeah, I think a good question anytime you call somebody is, are you in the middle of something? Is now a bad time?
Right.
And if we do that consistently, then we're already addressing that objection right out of the gate. They say, no, I'm in the middle of something. And you say, when would be a good time to call you back? This afternoon?
Yep.
They go, sure, call me back this afternoon.
Got it. Perfect.
This segment of Get Into Our Podcast is brought to you by The Art of Prospecting, your guide to getting in the door by Steve Kloida.
Steve Kloida was known internationally for increasing salespeople's ability to make solid appointments with qualified prospects. You too can learn this essential skill by ordering a copy of his superb book, The Art of Prospecting, your guide to getting in the door. In this book, Steve shares the top strategies and tactics he has developed, implemented, and personally tested with more than 1 million sales and prospecting calls. You can get his book on the website, theprospectingexpert.com. In addition, check out his other great online resources. Instant Sales Coaching, which will guide you through 5 online success modules. A guided prospecting process entitled Call Reluctance Transformer, and the Magnetic Selling Strategies Workbook, a detailed step-by-step guide to increasing your sales. Get any of these valuable resources at theprospectingexpert.com. Well, we are still on our book, The Magic of Thinking Big by David J. Schwartz, a great book on the value of the mind and what you can do. Chapter 10 is called Get the Action Habit, and some of his key points. One, there's people who get a job done are always in demand. And I think that's so true. I have 3 young sons. Well, they're not young. They're young men and have all started into the workplace in the last 5 years or so, 6 years. And I've always told them, if you can get to an appointment on time, dressed properly, and ready for the meeting, you put yourself in the top 5% of people. There are so many people just can't get things done. They can't get there. They don't have the right equipment. They're dressed poorly. Get to the appointment on time. I think Nike's quote, just do it, is appropriate. It's an action habit. So I think that's really important. What are some of the things you do to get the action habit?
Well, I always like to arrive about 15 minutes early, and I'll sit in the car. I'll bring a book. I've got a magazine that
Never
I'm
late.
reading. I'm never late, and really, it takes the pressure off of me. I don't have to battle and fight traffic. I can find a parking spot. I look at what suite they're in the building.
You know,
And
why
I'm
is it,
just
Scott, that whenever we're early, we never hit a red light?
right. Yeah,
We
That's
never,
something.
you just never get, but if you're a minute late, man, everything is in your
Oh,
way and your
it's
attitude just goes to heck.
Well, I mean, keep in mind that, the stress levels go up, creativity goes down.
There you go.
And if we need to go into an appointment with a creative mind, practice our active listening, being able to ask the right questions, being able to respond to what they're saying, and really be able to sort of carry the ball down the field to whether or not we're going to work together or not, or reasons why we'd want to work together, or if we're bringing up information that could be a latent consequences in the future that the prospect's not aware of, and we ask that in the form of a question or a statement, we're really creating that interest and curiosity throughout the entire call. We need to be on our game, and that creativity is so important. So take the pressure off, arrive early, use the extra time to build on your education, and you're going to feel more prepared when you go into that meeting. It's going to make a big difference.
So part of that action habit is get started earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't wait till the last minute to leave for that appointment. I had a boss told me once, he said, the only reason for arriving late is you left late. And don't wait for conditions to be just right.
Right.
When you want to try something new, when you want to get into that action habit, just start and then kind of find the path as you go rather than hoping everything's perfect before you start. I think I've told you the story of the friends of mine who were going to work together, but their website had to be right and had to get 16 brochures and they just never made the phone call.
You'll figure it out along the way, and what you find from your prospects will really define what you need to prepare for. So just decide to get started, go into an approach of gathering information, and then you'll be able to share what's needed. And conditions will never be perfect. They'll be perfect. I mean, if you look at that and you wait for that, you're going to be waiting for a very long time. So sometimes salespeople even have a bad attitude. And I think if you really commit to behavior,
we all have bad attitudes sometimes.
You really end up changing your attitudes. Yeah. I mean, cold calling can be a bit of a challenge. And if we just decide to do it and we keep calling until we get a really good one, and then once we get a good one, we want to keep calling because we got a good one.
Right.
But if you just commit to the behavior, it really cures a bad attitude.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about it before, and I think he mentions it earlier in the book, action cures fear.
Yeah.
All right. So the action habit, if I'm afraid of making phone calls or I don't like it, if there's some things that are distasteful in my job, and calling could be one of those things, or there's other things you have to do. Maybe it's writing a proposal or whatever, but just that's the first thing you do.
Mm-hmm.
Don't think about it. Don't ponder on it. Don't try to make your list. That's why if I'm going to make a cold call list or a prospecting list, I do it the day before or at the beginning of the week. I don't try to do it because I'll dawdle over it and never get the calls made.
Yeah. I think a good mantra to keep in mind is put your energy towards something productive. It can be just so rewarding, and taking that initiative is a special kind of action because you're doing something worthwhile without being told to do it. And that's integrity. And that's what I think good, successful salespeople have is they have commitment and they have integrity, and they do things without being asked. They do things because it's the right thing to do. And they live with that sense of purpose in their mind and in their spirit because they did something that they knew was right without being told. And that's the honorable thing to do. And that's integrity.
Yeah. And that sense of purpose that puts you into the action habit. I love that.
So our topic this week is, what is a perfect week? What does a perfect week look like? And as I
I'd like to
mentioned,
have one someday.
Yeah, well, it's all up to us. It's really up to us to be able to determine how can we take a week and turn it into a perfect week, and managing everything that comes at us in a way where we feel like we made all the right choices. And as I mentioned in the opening, when I work with company and I meet with each individual salesperson, I really ask them, what does a perfect week look like? And what it really tells me is, how are you managing your time? What is your goal? What do you want to accomplish? I think a great question to ask a sales team when I start working with them is also, how would you finish this sentence? I could sell more if only I could ...
Mm-hmm.
And usually the safest answer that they ever give me is, if I had more time. Well, what you're really telling me is you don't know how to trade your time. You're telling me that you don't know what your goal is that you want to accomplish every week. And what's happening is you're letting things happen to you versus making things happen to you. And when we are in a position of being proactive or reactive, what is our time default? Is it to be reactive? Is it to wait for the phone to ring and wait for something to come up and be a distraction? Or are we going to make it happen? And we're going to be proactive about achieving our goals. And our goals are a certain behavior every single day of how many calls do we make? How many appointments do we set? How many follow-up calls do we make? How many presentations do we do? How many commitments do we get? How many follow-up calls we do, etc. And ask for referrals. How many times do we ask for referrals?
So you've got to set all these things as goals, right?
Yeah, I think you need to really map it out going, here'd be a perfect week. I'll just make this up. Made 60 phone calls. 10 of them were new prospects that I've never talked to before. 50 were follow-up calls from previous messages. I had 8 discovery calls or appointments. I delivered 6 presentations, and of those 6 presentations, closed 4 deals. Now, the numbers may be different based on your product, service, company, sales cycle, etc. But the point is that you decided what you're going to do, not letting it happen to you. And that's being very proactive on your time.
Yeah, I think so. I have to agree totally with what you're saying on that. When I look at a perfect week, I try to set up what I can control and making sure those things get accomplished. So the things you mentioned, making the 60 phone calls to the new prospects and the old ones, to do what I can to get good appointment calls, to deliver presentations. But I think those things happen as a result of the prospecting calls, the new appointments, the follow-up calls, all those things that I'm goal setting. The closing of the deal happens if I do all the other things properly. If I'm filling up my funnel, my pipeline with all the right things, then out the bottom starts to drop the deals. I have to determine what are those 5 most crucial activities that I have to get done every week in order for my business to grow. And then I have to commit to making those happen no matter what, no matter how busy I get. And one of the things that seems to be the biggest challenge for me, and I think for many of us, is that we do the wrong activities at the wrong time, and then we miss the opportunity to do the activity that had to be done. So if I'm spending time at 10 o'clock in the morning writing a proposal, when that could have been done at 7 o'clock in the morning when maybe I couldn't get hold of somebody, or 5 o'clock in the evening, or over a lunch where I'm doing a working lunch, I'm putting my time in, and then I didn't have time to make my phone calls this week. Of course you didn't, because you were doing something that didn't have to be done during phone calling time, and now you've lost that opportunity. So be very careful about where you're putting your time, because the opportunity can be lost to do the things that you need to do because you filled that time up. One of the things I like to do from a time management standpoint toward a perfect week is I try to put almost all of my appointments in the afternoon, because I'm better at phone calling. I'm better at doing creative things in the morning. So then I want to have my afternoons where I'm a little bit, I need to be pushed into things. And if I have a customer appointment, I'm going to be sharp. I'm going to force myself to be sharp. Whereas if I'm trying to do phone calling in the afternoon, I tend to get lazy or lose control or get lackadaisical. Do you find that you have better times to work, Scott?
Yeah, I think it's really up to my energy levels. And, when I first started working with a coach and a mentor, they were asking me, when do you have the most energy? Is it in the morning or is it in the afternoon? And I say in the morning. They say, so, do the activities that are the toughest for you in the morning when you have the most energy. And then the ones that are easier to do is when you have less energy. And another thing that they brought up is, your goal is to create opportunities, create more opportunities, and leverage the opportunities that you create. So in finding, when I work with companies, they invite me in and they say, hey, Scott, can you come in and work with us? We've got a closing problem. I come in, I ask a few questions, go through, a few conversations with people. They don't have a closing problem. They have an opening problem. And they're just not getting in front of enough people. They're not creating more opportunities and leveraging the opportunities that they create. And I know that sometimes when we think about calling and prospecting as opportunities, there's other opportunities that we have. Take a list of all the sales that you made and call them 3 months afterwards and say, I'm just calling to find out what results are you getting? Can you tell me a little bit more how it's working? And most likely you're going to get some accolades. At that point, ask for a referral or an introduction to somebody.
Right.
Ask them for a LinkedIn recommendation if they say something nice to you. If you sell a product and it's on warranty for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, 6 months before the warranty expires, saying, we want to follow up. The warranty is going to be expiring soon, and we want to make sure that you're staying in business or it's still working for you. Do you want to consider upgrading it? Or maybe we've got a maintenance contract, or maybe we have an extended warranty. So those are opportunities too.
Yeah,
so
too many salespeople turn their customer over to delivery and they move on. And they wonder why they have to make so many prospecting calls.
That's part of the culture in some cases. Salespeople can't fight that. They have to turn it over to account management, but they can still have a dotted line to their prospects because that's a tremendous sense of referrals and new business coming in. So just think, if you just asked everybody that you've sold to this year to give you a referral or introduction to somebody that would buy from you, you'd have the same year next year as you did this year because you have the same amount of customers and you're still getting in all of this new business coming in that's aside from the referrals.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think the other thing about time management is you have to look at your industry. I do a lot of work with construction people, and those salespeople, they're going to get out early to make their calls before the construction process happens. When the guys are standing around and organizing their day, they have a chance to talk with them. But if they wait till 10 o'clock to try and contact somebody, they're up working and they're not talking to people. So how does your industry work can be very important on how you organize that day in order to achieve that perfect week.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And sometimes it's based on when your customers are most available. When I was selling websites to attorneys on the East Coast, I found that Fridays were my best days because they wanted to cross it off their list. They wanted to decide whether they're going to do it or not do it, and they didn't want to carry it over for another week. So I did really well on Fridays. I always made sure if I took a day off, it was not on a Friday because that's when I had my best results. So sometimes your prospects determine when the best opportunity is to call them and to make that commitment.
And you learn a lot by tracking what you're doing too. I don't think enough of us track the results of what we're getting and when we're doing these things. And it was only through tracking and through observation that you learned how much more productive you were on Fridays in that situation. It's only through tracking where I finally came to the realization that I suck at making calls in the afternoon, or I just avoid it. And so get a feeling for how you work, how the system works, how the industry works, so that you can make the best use of that time and focus yourself toward that perfect week.
Yeah, makes sense.
Scott, you wanted to talk about some resources that we've got.
So on the show notes at getinthedoorpodcast.com, we're going to have a couple of resources. Bill's got a video that we'll share with you, and then I also have one on what is a perfect week.
And our golden nugget this week has a lot to do with the action habit we talked about earlier. Made me think of this quote by Robert Schuller: "Beginning is half done." And I even found a little video where he talks about the story of beginning is half done, and we'll have that in our show notes too. But Scott, do you believe beginning is half done?
I do. I think showing up, you're halfway there. And if you show up and you're prepared and you're on time and you've got a great attitude, it makes a better outcome a lot easier. And I think that's really, again, lowers stress. And when we lower stress, we increase creativity.
I know for prospecting, just getting started, I overcome a big hurdle. When I have to write, just putting a blank sheet of paper and starting to write some notes down, just that process of beginning, sharpening the pencil or grabbing your list of names, it starts the beginning process and gets you moving. And sometimes it's that inertia that we have to overcome more than anything, that lack of getting started. So just go ahead and begin and you can make it work.
And again, it's never going to be perfect. One of the things that I struggle with is I want things to be perfect, and they're never going to be perfect. So if I don't start something, then it's perfectly done. It's perfectly not done. It's what it is.
That's right. Well, and you know what? There are those people that are so afraid of being imperfect that they never try anything.
Yeah,
so go ahead and screw up a couple of times and see what you can make happen.
So these notes will be on our podcast show notes at getinthedoorpodcast.com.
My website is reachdev.com. Next week, Chapter 11 of The Magic of Thinking Big, How to Turn Defeat into Victory. And our topic will be selling to the C-suite.
Wow, it's going to be good.